this rather sad path. I say rather sad because just over a mile behind me, in medieval times, there was a leper colony, and this was the path that they used to follow down into a particular village, to a particular church. In fact, it's known locally as the Lepers Trail. Of course, all visual signs of the leper colony have long since disappeared. It's farmland now. It's actually a farm, private land. And of course, the trail is still here, and so is the reason why they used to go to this church. The path split back there, but this leg of the path seems to have come through to the back of the church, through the graveyard. I have visited this church before in another video. Yeah, it's a beautiful church. The reason I was tracing down the leper's path was to find this here, this low and small window. Now, the idea of this window was that the lepers, who of course were isolating due to their disease, it was all about the fear of cross-infection, and something that we can all relate to these days. But that window there was so that they could peer in and enjoy, if that's the correct word, enjoy the service, but without risking any of the parishioners inside. Parts of this church are from the 11th and 12th century, and to have what's called a leper's window apparently wasn't that unusual in the older churches. It provided for a need, I suppose. I'm now heading up out of the village for the second time today, actually, but I'm trying to get to a site where a highwayman, a very unlikely highwayman actually, was hung on a gibbet. Jack Upperton was surely far too old to be a highwayman. You know, highwaymen of the age sort of mainly 25 and under, actually. Very short life for obvious reasons. Usually got hung. Jack was actually 60 when he committed his crime. And as you trawl the internet, people seem to feel sorry for him. Certainly in this local area, that's how it's been passed down through the generations. And you feel perhaps he was one of the many victims of what's been happening for hundreds of years, you know. Things like the enclosures, where land was slowly taken from the common man, or his access to the land anyway, and bit by bit the powerful and the wealthy got more and more of it, and it's continued on actually, because it continued on till today, where I think it's much less than 1% of the population of England own quite a bit more than 50% of the land area. And so it was back in 1770, on a dark and windy night about this time of year, Jack and his accomplice lay in wait for the post to be taken along the King's Highway. Now, he didn't kill the person carrying the post, but they certainly scared them enough for the whole lot to be handed over to Jack and his accomplice very quickly. And they sort of got away with it for a while. But apparently Jack used to go drinking. You know, he didn't make a lot of money. It wasn't a big haul, shall we say. I think it was in today's equivalent money. The internet tells me it might have been between £500 and £2,000. That's in today's money. So, you know, it wouldn't have been life-changing, but perhaps for a poor farm labourer, it was a glimmer of hope that he could keep going and enjoy himself a bit longer, which of course he probably did in the ale house, in the pub. And perhaps people saw him sort of flashing the cash, but it's likely his tongue was loosened by the beer, shall we say, and he perhaps said too much. And of course he was dobbed into the authorities. Now, as I say, his accomplice got away, but the fact that the chap who was carrying the post was able to recognise Jack despite his disguise. Yes, Jack was sentenced, and he was hung in 1771. So we're coming up to the King's Highway here. Believe it or not, 300 odd years ago, this was one of the main routes between the towns and eventually heading on up to London. And it was at this point along the route, apparently, that the heinous crime was committed. And it's at this point somewhere where the gibbet, or as it now is, the mark for the gibbet, is placed. At the time, this area, this crossroads here, would have been devoid of trees. And when Jack was sentenced, and then when he was hung in Horsham, the judiciary, in the usual sort of gruesome style of the day, especially with highwaymen, they wanted his body gibbeted at the area where he committed the crime, as a warning to anyone else, all passers-by and anyone in the local area, not to do this kind of thing, you know. Gibbeting is horrendous when you think about it. They took the body, and a blacksmith welded up a cage so that the body was secure in a cage, secure from vermin, secure from perhaps members of the family that might want to take the body back and give it a burial. Usually the body was also tarred, covered in tar, to preserve it, which seems possibly likely with Jack's body, because apparently it lasted 2 years hung up in this cage on the gibbet here. Rather awful to think about, you know, as the body slowly decomposed. Most of the bones would fall to the floor, but sometimes the skull might be held within the cage. Yeah, for all to see. And this post here is approximately the point where that gibbet stood. Well, the original gibbet stood till about 1850, they think, and then the weather got the better of it. You know, it was just a rotten stump, and then eventually just a hole in the ground. And some years later, the local hunt was happening, and a horse was laid to ground because it had stumbled into this hole, so they backfilled the hole. But that's when local people took it upon themselves to keep the point of where the gibbet was marked. And as I say, there's a certain sympathy that perhaps Jack was just a desperate man and not a evil criminal, you know. I don't know if you can see that very clearly, but it's got a capital J, a capital U for, of course, Jack Upperton, the date at which he was hung and gibbeted, or the year anyway. And it's got some kind of art forms of a couple of gibbets there, and the body would have hung down on the end of a chain or a line. Yes, and this post here has been sort of replaced apparently on a regular basis. Look, someone's actually left Jack a bottle of beer there. That's a nice gesture. Of course, the story of Jack Apperton doesn't end just there, you know. Amongst the people that have been replacing that sort of memorial post to where the gibbet stood, you know, look at these beeches, absolutely stunning. Don't know if the camera does that justice. Yeah, so people that have been replacing this post, in recent years, they think it's probably direct descendants from the Apperton family, trying to keep his name alive, perhaps trying to shed some light on the fact that he wasn't necessarily an evil criminal, just a desperate man. But one of the first people, I think, to get involved in marking where the gibbet stood was a local farmer. This local farmer, Grabburn, took it upon himself to replace the post at least once, because he remembers as a young man, he was born in the late 1800s and I think died in the mid 60s. He remembers in the local pubs talking to old men who would relate stories about Jack Apperton, you know. Now, it wouldn't have been first-hand information, because when you think of the timeline, you know, Jack was hung in 1771, so it would have been passed down a couple of generations. But this farmer took it upon himself to make sure that the memory of Jack was kept alive, along with the stories. And of course, amongst those stories, many sort of supernatural type tales. You know, people, apparently on more than one occasion, lots of different people have been up on these roads, up on the King's Highway, on a dark, windy night, similar to the night that Jack committed his crime, and have seen and heard very ghostly things, you know. My plan is to camp as close as I can to where the gibbet stood tonight. I can't get too close. It's quite a busy sort of thoroughfare for hikers, dog walkers and horse riders, but also a lot of this is on a large estate, this land, so I've got to sort of get a little bit away from it, but I'll keep as close to the gibbet site as I can, and yeah, sort of test my mettle, as it were. You know, after hearing some of these pretty spooky stories about Jack, what Jack gets up to during the night, yeah, we'll see how it goes. Nice. Need a brew. Tonight I've got some lentils somewhere in a little bag here. And I'm going to try and make some kind of lentil soup or lentil mush, really, because the thing is, the day before yesterday I had a tooth out, and a tooth pulled out, one of the big ones at the back, a molar I think they called it, and still struggling to try and eat on one side of my mouth. So whatever I do tonight, I'm going to simmer it like crazy and just get it really soft. And if I can add a bit of flavour, well, that's a bonus. Chop up everything quite small. Might make it a bit easier on the mouth, I think. Add in some coconut oil. I'll add in some mixed herbs. Add in loads of garlic. It's easier to take the pot off and pile it in and try and manhandle it from your knife to your hand to the pot. Get that back on again. The veg seems to have softened down a bit, so we'll chuck in a load of water and then we'll chuck in the lentils. Might just take that off, make it a bit easier. I've also got some dehydrated greens here, just some peas and French beans, but they can go in now as well. And the longer they simmer, the longer softer they'll get, should I say, and the easier it will be to eat when you've only got half a mouth. We'll stick on a few more sticks, I think. I'm going to add the half a stock cube now, because although it's well before 6 o'clock, it's already got pretty dark, and this will be the last thing I should think we'll be able to see in natural light, at least. I've been simmering the heck out of this, and it's gone into a pleasant, soft sort of mushy soup. So yeah, that'll do me. predicted it would stay a few degrees, a good few degrees above 10 degrees centigrade or Celsius, and I think it certainly did, you know. In fact, I didn't even wear the all-in-one sort of woolen base layer, which I wear like a boiler suit, like a onesie. I didn't actually put that on last night. I didn't think it would be cold enough, and I was fine without it, really. I kept the fire ticking over. You know, a couple of times it went so low that it nearly went out. I had to blow it back to life a couple of times, but I didn't really need the fire for warmth, probably. It's just nice to have a warm glow sometimes. Yeah, so